get started in just a minute. We're missing our speaker. He's here a minute ago. Be right back. See, this is it. We're going to get started again. I hope you all enjoyed that wonderful lunch sponsored by Cisco. Yay. And the Cisco experience continues with us today here. I'm here to introduce Dan Jerome. Dan is a consulting systems engineer at Cisco with a specialty in network management. Dan joined Cisco in 1999. He's based here in Toronto. He's worked with all of the major service providers in Canada, but apparently we're not major. I don't know. Anyway. Prior to joining Cisco, Dan worked as an independent consultant on network management projects with Rogers Cable, Bell Canada, and had a brief stint working in Chile. Dan is a CCNP certified guy, and he holds a Bachelor of Applied Science degree from the University of Toronto and an MBA from the Schulich School of Business in Toronto. Dan's going to talk about automating your service fulfillment. And without further ado, ladies and gentlemen, Dan Jerome.
Great. Thank you. Thank you very much. Can you guys hear me okay? Is that coming through good? Okay, great. So I guess we have about 35 minutes today. I'm going to talk about really the evolution of service fulfillment at a service provider and how we can improve efficiencies with doing that. So we're going to talk about automating service fulfillment. Automating is a topic that's near and dear to my heart. So as far as an agenda goes, I'll basically introduce the topic and talk a little bit about the current state of affairs with service providers and ISPs. I'll then talk about the evolution of an ISP, and I'll sort of take you through a bit of a timeline of the growth of an ISP. And then we'll see when they run into difficulties as far as continuing that growth pattern. And then we'll introduce a concept called agile operations, where we look at trying to improve the agility of a service provider as they get to a certain size and have trouble introducing new services, changing those services moving forward. And then I'll conclude with a summary of some of the concepts we've talked about. Okay. So as far as service evolution, this picture, by the way, I took when we went up recently with my family up to near Picton. We went on a little bike ride around there. This is called the Lake of the Mountain. I thought it was a nice image to throw on here. Anyway, as far as service evolution with service providers, typically internet service providers got in with providing basic internet service, connectivity service. And then, they may have moved into providing voice. But then there's, a proliferation of services that our service provider customers are looking at offering to get into other areas, to address market opportunities, to try to introduce some of the newer technologies that are coming out. So there's a lot of stuff going on, a lot of complex services that our customers are looking to introduce. So some of the trends, Gartner identified 10 critical tech trends that for the next 5 years that our service provider customers are facing. Here's a list of them. I'll go through them briefly. We've got a lot of the organizational entrenchment and disruption characteristics taking place at a lot of our customers. So organizations are either getting entrenched in what they're doing, or there's a lot of disruption taking place. Both of those vectors impact the ability of a service provider to continue to operate and deliver the services that they're looking to deliver. Of course, software-defined networks is a big buzzword in the industry today, and a lot of customers are interested in finding out more about what it is, how it can help them, how it can reduce costs. So that's another big area. Bigger data and storage. So everyone's heard about big data. Again, another trend. Storing large amounts of data, as well as trying to harvest that data and make sense of the data that we capture. Hybrid cloud services. So whether it's a public cloud service, private cloud, or whether we have some sort of hybrid model. That's another area that our service providers are faced with. Client and server architectures, we've come from the days where we had mainframes and dumb terminals to full client-server architectures where processing was distributed between servers and clients. And now we seem to be going back the other way. So there's a whole range of different architectures. Internet of Things, Cisco talks a lot about this, about connecting all kinds of things to the internet, machine-to-machine type of connection. So again, there's a rapid growth in the number of devices that we're connecting to the internet. IT appliance madness, where a lot of applications are now being delivered on appliances versus installing software on a server running a particular operating system. So we've got all these appliances proliferating, and trying to deal with those is also an issue. Operational complexity. Increasingly, our operations are getting more and more complex and requiring more and more attention from the service provider. Virtualization, so virtual data centers is another big area, and IT demand. So, IT is really placing a lot of demands on the service provider for all the critical services that they provide. So this is just some of the trends. I'm sure a lot of you are facing, one or more of these in your businesses, and they really impact the ability of a service provider to deliver their services. Okay, so some questions that come out. How can an ISP, introduce new services, whether they be in collaboration or entertainment type services? How can we introduce these to the market quickly, efficiently, with high quality? We may want to incorporate third-party applications as part of our service offering. So we might want to leverage some of the capabilities of another service provider and bring those into our offering. How can we integrate those easily into an existing offering? And as well, how can we improve our ability to introduce new services into the market? How can we improve that innovation cycle so that if we spot a market opportunity, how can we take advantage of that and then inject those new services into our offering to seize that opportunity and actually make money on it? So these are all questions that are facing our service provider customers. So I'll attempt to help with a solution to provide a solution that will help with these questions. Really, it's all about agility. So maintaining agility with the operations group, being able to, basically roll with the punches as new market opportunities come, to be able to adapt to those and quickly respond to the market opportunity and, be able to innovate in a rapid manner. Okay, so now what I'll do is I'll take you through sort of the life cycle of an ISP and how an ISP grows up. And we'll talk about some of the challenges that an ISP has faced. So, we start at the birth of an ISP. A lot of you in this room are, I'm sure, familiar with this. ISPs start from very humble beginnings. Maybe one or two people have an idea and they want to take advantage, or they want to take advantage of a market opportunity and deliver a service. So, we might have, very limited staff, one or two network engineers that are doing everything, from provisioning of a service to assuring the service to washing the dishes, taking out the trash, paying the bill, doing everything, right? So, a lot of times we're pulled in various different ways. We're doing everything to get that service up and running. There's no real automation in this stage. But really, there's no need in a lot of cases. We don't really need automation when it's a fairly early operation, when we're getting started. The order to activation time is short. It might be days or less to deliver a service for a customer. So there's no real issues with automation requirements here. We might have a small number of customers as well, and a small number of services that we deliver. So the downside, there's really no downsides. We might not have any process, but there might not be a real need for process at this stage. And there may be inconsistencies between customers, but again, it's not a huge deal. We've got a small number of customers. We can easily accommodate that. All right, as we grow up, we become a toddler. Now, we're still small and nimble, so we can still, provide great customer service. Customer satisfaction is a key component of our service. And we're able to differentiate ourselves from some of the bigger players who may not be as responsive and capable of delivering good customer service. With this growth, though, we need to add staff. So, one person now needs to branch out. We need to get a few more people perhaps involved. This may introduce some inconsistencies in our processes, but again, it's not a big deal. We may start to get a little bit more rigid about how we do things, but the processes at best are loose at this point. And we may introduce new services or new flavors of our service. So maybe we introduce new quality classes of service, for example, or address different types of markets. So there's a bit of growth here from the service standpoint. And we might even add an order portal or something like that to be able to take orders. Okay, we go into our teenage years. Growth continues, right? Success is breeding success here. This is the exciting times where we might land some big deals. Word of mouth gets out. We're doing really well. We may add new products to take advantage of a market opportunity. We probably need to continue to add staff. We might move experienced folks off of working on one service to working on a new service to help get that new service up and running. The processes are evolving, and they're becoming increasingly hardened. So we have, very specific processes. But again, it's not widely adopted. There's no sort of mandate to adopt these processes. And the processes may have holes in them, right? But it's not a big deal. We can generally get by with them. But we start to see some problems. We might see some churn where we have customers that start leaving and we don't clean up, what we've set up for those customers. So we leave dangling ends in our service. There might be some inconsistencies in the deployments because we have different people deploying things in different ways. And our record keeping may not be good, right? But again, it's not a huge deal. We're growing fast and we're able to generally adapt okay to this growth. Then we start to get into the challenging years. So this is where the processes are hardened, where it becomes increasingly difficult to change the way we do things. And this impacts our ability to introduce new services or make changes to the existing services. We've got tribal knowledge at this point where, that really means that we've got different people in the organization that have different levels of expertise. So, Joe over here knows how to troubleshoot, an Ethernet problem, whereas Jim over here only knows how to provision, a certain type of VPN, for example. So we've got different levels of expertise amongst different people. We may also get a proliferation of homegrown tools where we look at using scripts and other, freeware tools to start to automate certain parts of the process. But again, it's not widely adopted. Some guys have their own special scripts they use. Other guys have theirs. There may not be a sort of overall policy. And record keeping as well starts to suffer. We've got, records kept on a guy's PC, but not on another guy's PC. It might be a Visio diagram. We might have Excel spreadsheets. We're trying to keep track. We're growing fast. We don't have that process, that sort of standardization on how we keep our records. So, and as well, to add complexity to this, is new services are being introduced that are more complex than just the original services we had providing connectivity. So, we might have more components to these services, voice and cloud, and we need to worry about storage and servers, and so it just gets more complex to provision these newer services. And as well, we start to get fallout from inconsistencies in our processes. So now we start to see problems where, different people are provisioning things in different ways, and now we don't understand how one guy has provisioned one service compared to another guy. So it slows down our ability to troubleshoot, and that has impacts on customer service, of course. So definitely we have some issues here. So we've grown up, we've said, okay, we've come to a realization that, hey, we need to do something about this. So we need to add some structure. So this is kind of our first foray into introducing automation into the process. So typically what we do is we look at the process, we document it. That's usually the first step. We find all the missing holes. We figure out the best way to document this and figure out what that process is. We develop the workflow. We incorporate all decision points. Then we might go out and hire a really smart developer, or look at some tools that are out in the marketplace and try to procure the right expertise to put the automation in place. We build the automation. It was a painful process, but after going through it, we're like, we're happy. Everyone's celebrating. We've automated. Everything's efficient now. We've taken out all those problems, and we're successful. We're back on our growth trajectory again, and things are great. Okay, that's not the end of the presentation. But we've got problems. We reach our middle life here, and we've got a crisis. We've grown. The automation works great today, but the business continues to evolve, right? We continue to introduce new services. We think we're great. Now we can do everything. So now we add other services. Our existing services evolved, might have more options, more variable type services. As well, we might incorporate new equipment into the network. So we introduce new vendors. We might also acquire other companies. So we might have to incorporate their equipment and their processes and their services and customers into our existing operation. So this causes a bit of stress, but we go, okay, no problem. We can just replicate what we did before. We automated a process before. We'll just replicate it, make some tweaks to the new process, and then we'll have automation for that new change. But what happens is we get a proliferation of these hardened processes. So as this continues, we keep replicating processes, making changes. One of the problems is that we replicate the same subcomponent over and over and over again in our process, and then when we have to change that component, it impacts all of those other processes. So now we've got a big headache when we try to make some changes into the organization that we can't respond quick enough. So maintaining that automation starts to become an issue, and that's really, we don't want to do that. That's not core to our business. Our core business is delivering services. We don't want to become an automation company. So this is where we need to re-architect our automation, and that's a big issue. That's a lot of resources, a lot of money, a lot of time to do that. Okay. What we really need is automation with agility, right? We need to be able to have an automated process that can adapt as the business changed, as we add new services we haven't even thought about today in the future, right? Our automation basically addresses the problem only today as it exists today. We really want to take it so that it can accommodate new capabilities down the road. So we really want to address the larger problem of delivering a service. The latest generation of tools that we have out there look at breaking down our service fulfillment problem into building blocks with clean interfaces, which allow us to then integrate those building blocks together into a larger process, basically orchestrating these multiple different components. Really, we're using the techniques and the concepts in object-oriented programming, for those of you who may be familiar with that, and applying that to service fulfillment. So we're breaking things down to objects with very clean interfaces to allow us to then put those objects together into a bigger object, essentially. Okay, so this is the concept of agile operations. Now I've sort of taken you through that process. We've run into a problem. We need to introduce a more agile environment here. So this is an agile operations blueprint here, where we've got, at the top, we've got a higher level orchestration capability where we can orchestrate a service, an end-to-end service, And underneath, we've got various different domains or service suppliers that are independent. So, this is kind of one service supplier, this is another service supplier. And I like to use the analogy of an automotive manufacturer here, where, say, for example, BMW is building a car. They are really just an assembly company. They assemble the sub-assemblies and the components that they get from other suppliers. So they might have, an engine supplier and a transmission supplier, a radiator supplier. They have a contract with those suppliers to provide the engine with a certain specification. They also have a contract with the transmission supplier to provide the transmission with a very specific specification. The engine supplier, let's say, this guy's the engine supplier. He doesn't have to know anything about this guy. Let's say he's the transmission supplier. They don't need to know anything about their own internal operations. I don't need to know how the transmission guy builds transmissions. The transmission guy doesn't care about how I build engines, right? The only relationship is northbound with BMW. That's where I have the contract, and I have to make sure that the engines I build meet the specification that I'm contracted to, right? So this is essentially the concept here, where we've got these independent service suppliers that are talking to the northbound system with a standard interface and the northbound system does all the orchestration. Then we've got modular components. So we've got an engine supplier and a transmission supplier. They're not the same company. They may be closely held with the main manufacturer, or maybe not. Maybe they're totally independent, but they're separate suppliers, right? And there's no dependencies between those two groups. As I mentioned, the engine supplier doesn't care about what's happening at the transmission supplier. This enables us to easily assemble these sub-assemblies into a larger service, okay? Fairly simple type of example. So let's apply this to a service provider. So let's say we have a provider. He's currently offering two different services: enterprise branch connectivity, let's say, connecting branches together. And there might be various different flavors of that service, maybe different service levels: gold, silver, bronze. And then we've got a hosted voice service as well, where we're providing voice services, voicemail, outside line, call waiting, E911, what have you. There's a desire to introduce a combination of these two, a enterprise voice service. So we want to combine these two services together. So what we want to do is treat these services as independent domains. And so the enterprise branch service is completely independent from the hosted voice service, much like our BMW example, where the engines were built separately from the transmissions. Totally different service suppliers. And the specific details of how branch connectivity is delivered is not really relevant to the hosted voice guy. He doesn't really care, right? However, this is where the analogy kind of breaks down, in that there actually is a dependency between these services. So for example, when you're creating a branch and delivering branch connectivity, the hosted voice service may need to get an IP address, say, for the gateway to install a voice gateway at the branch, right? So we need to actually pass some data between those two different suppliers. And this is where we integrate across domains, right? And this is where the dangers come in, where we have to integrate. Because really those horizontal relationships where we have to pass data between those domains, we could say, okay, we just pass the data between those two. However, what we're doing is we're tying those two domains together. And you can just think of other services and other data that needs to pass between those two domains and other domains. It creates a big mess of integration, such that if you then need to change out one of those components, let's say you change vendors or what have you, all of a sudden everything else breaks because we've got all of those horizontal dependencies, right? So really what we want to do is we need to manage those horizontal relationships, but manage them vertically. So we need to be able to push the data up and then down across these domains, if that makes sense. So what we do is we introduce what's called a catalog. And the catalog provides a layer of abstraction where we can advertise the capabilities of a domain. We can advertise, say, what the enterprise branch connectivity domain does. It provides things like an IP address, when we create that connectivity. And then that catalog also advertises what the inputs are, what the requirements are for a domain. So for example, the hosted voice domain requires an IP address in order to provision the voice service. So there's a standard interface there. And what we can do is then use that standard interface by a higher level catalog, which then puts these two domains together and orchestrates across all of the domains to build an end-to-end service, right? So it manages the passing of the data between these two domains to orchestrate a service. So the higher level catalog here that we talked about, it orchestrates between these two domains. And what we do is we can leverage a single physical and logical inventory to drive the rest of the business. And each of these service suppliers may in fact have their own inventory. So our ordering process there on the right, first we need to verify availability. So I've got a bit of an animation here that kind of walks us through this. We need to basically check whether we have resources to deliver this service. So we need to look at things like, do I have CPE devices? Do I have an IP address, IP addresses, whatever, all of the VLAN IDs, et cetera. Let's check our inventory, both physical and logical, to make sure that we have inventory to support this service. Okay, we've got the inventory. Then the next step is to order the branch connectivity. So we then call down to the branch connectivity service supplier. He generates an IP address. We want to pass that IP address over to the hosted voice domain. So we could pass it across, but we don't want to do this. This integrates the two domains together, which is exactly what we don't want to do. So what we do is we pass that IP address up to the higher level catalog that orchestrates the whole service. Then the next step is we add the voice service, right? So we make a call down to the voice domain, that service supplier, and then we pass the IP address down. Very simple example, but it shows how we use the catalog to manage the relationship between these domains. Taking it further, if we need to add another domain, say we've got a legacy domain, there's a legacy service that we have, a legacy system that doesn't have a catalog, doesn't have any notion of a catalog. It might be an original service that we have. We can still retain that domain, but just wrap it in a standard interface. So we can, we've got a legacy system, we then wrap it in a standard interface, and that provides a standard way of basically advertising the capabilities of that legacy system to the upper level orchestration system, and then we can access it from above. Similar concept with external service providers. So an external provider, if we want to incorporate it into our service, we can then use that standard interface to provide that capabilities within our offering. All the time we're doing this, we're not touching any of these other domains. We don't have to touch these domains. They're totally independent. And as long as we manage that interface properly, then we can keep those domains running along, going forward. Okay, this has been kind of conceptual. I hope you've been able to follow along with some of the analogies, but I really want to get to what the benefits are of architecting things this way. Really, what we're striving for is to keep each domain independent, so we don't have to make any changes to the domains, to each service supplier. So if you've got a service that's working just fine and you've got all the tools and processes completely ironed out, don't change it. All we're doing is providing an interface to that service or that domain so that we can then access it by a higher level orchestration capability. Okay? We don't have to disrupt any legacy domains, and we can wrap each domain in a standard interface. It's also simple to assemble these services from these independent domains. Right? We can easily, using that standard interface, we know what all the inputs and outputs are. We can easily just put these different domains together. The abstraction allows building blocks to be swapped out. So if I want to change a whole service component of this end-to-end service, I can swap it out, put a new one in, as long as I don't disturb that higher level interface. That interface remains standard. I can do whatever I want in the underlying domain. right? So there's no impact on all the existing products, and I don't have to revisit all of the other processes I have. And so this really helps us quickly introduce new services and technologies into the network. And it, again, allows us to keep each domain independent and test it fully independently of all the other domains. There's also benefits to the assurance side. So even though we've been basically talking about fulfillment and you know, provisioning a service, there's also benefits on the assurance side. So monitoring and you know, troubleshooting a service. We've got improved accuracy and efficiency, which you'll get with any sort of automation. You know, you'll have a repeatable process. You'll understand how things are provisioned. We minimize the impact from, you know, humans making all the configuration changes on the devices. I'm sure we've all seen it where, you know, even we've done it, where we try to stick to a certain standard and we make one change, we're tired, we're doing something too fast, we make a change and we cause a big problem in the network. You know, automation will certainly help us avoid that. And we also, one of the side benefits here is we get accurate records. So, you know, by introducing this type of automation, we can enter the data once, it's entered incorrectly, we can validate the data when it's entered, and then we've got this source of truth that we can then drive the rest of the organization with. We can drive, you know, planning processes, assurance operations. We can understand the impact when we have a failure, what customers are affected. So there's a lot of benefits that having a good solid database, a good solid source of truth can help in many ways. And then as well, there's sort of the side benefit that if a service is provisioned the same way all the time, it's easier to troubleshoot. We know how it's provisioned. We know what the common problems are. There's no variability in how these services are delivered. As far as standards go, so this isn't something that's, you know, wildly earth-shattering. There's a bunch of standards that are out there that can help, you know, our customers with deploying these types of principles in their networks. ETOM is one that you may have heard of. It provides a set of processes. There's also TAM. There's also PSA, which is called Product and Services Assembly, and it's a big part of this agile business architecture that we've been talking about. It allows us to provide that abstraction and put a wrapper around our services and provide a standard interface with known inputs and outputs. Really, these standards provide best practices for your organization. So if you're looking for you know, a process for, you know, fulfilling a service or how to assure a service, you can use these standards as sort of a starting point and then apply them to your operation. And you know, you don't have to reinvent the wheel. You can trust that a lot of smart people have already crossed this path before and have implemented these types of processes in their environments. Okay, so just to summarize, I think we're probably getting close to the time limit. This agile business architecture that I've talked about, or ABA, it's an evolutionary approach to optimize a service provider's operation. It's not revolutionary, right? We don't want to make huge change. We know there's been a significant investment in the way you do things. We don't want to change that. It's a modular architecture, so it provides this notion of dividing things into building blocks and making it modular and tight modules with known interfaces that we can then leverage and use throughout all of our different services. It's multi-technology and multi-vendor capable, right? So this is not a Cisco-specific thing. This is, you know, allows our customers to be multi-vendor and multi-technology. And it's industry proven. We've got customers that are actually using this in their production operations today. Various sizes of customers from, you know, tier 1 service providers down to lower tier ISPs that are using this technology and these concepts today. It's not a product. So this is not a product. You can't buy ABA from Cisco or anybody else. It's really a methodology. We've got products that support this, but it's not a specific product. It's also not a disruption of your existing operations. So as I mentioned, if things are working fine, we don't want to disrupt that. We can leverage that and use that in building this architecture out. And it's not a replacement of existing investment you may have in tools. We want to leverage those existing tools where they're working for you and basically just expose the capabilities of those domains or those tools so they can be used by a higher level orchestration system. Okay, so really agile operations provides us with future readiness and a lower cost to serve. Here we've got the diagram, service orders flowing into an orchestration system, which then uses standardized interfaces to talk to underlying domains that are advertising their capabilities to put together an end-to-end service. Right? So this gives us agility. Service orchestration is really agnostic to the underlying technology. We don't get hung up on delivering a Cisco Ethernet service or a Juniper Ethernet service. All right? It's really agnostic to the technology. We're delivering an Ethernet service. And so we can have different underlying technologies delivering that service. It's modular and flexible. It supports both growth models, whether it's organic change, sort of natural growth that the company's going through, or transformational change, where we're introducing radical new services or technologies into the network. And it provides us with that faster time to market, where we can take advantage of a market opportunity and quickly roll out a service to then meet the market demand. Also provides simplification. So we've minimized the dependencies between components. All of those horizontal links that we have between these domains, we've removed those. So it makes it a lot simpler to put together components by using this higher level orchestration. Standardized interface makes it easier to assemble these components together. We've got more accurate inventory data as a result of implementing this type of process, which again can be leveraged in other parts of the organization. And it provides a lower cost to serve. So we can definitely drive down the costs of delivering a service because we've got automation now that we can leverage and make our delivery of services more efficient. Okay, so that concludes my presentation. I hope that was somewhat illuminating for you. I know it's probably a different presentation than you normally get, but it's more of a conceptual idea for improving operations. Any questions? I don't know where we are as far as time. I think we're probably nearly up. Yeah, go ahead.
A small ISP starts off, and as you said, does run-of-the-mill stuff by hand.
Yeah.
What I've noticed in recent years in Canada, a number of small ISPs have grown from less than 1,000 customers to 2,000, 4,000, some of them 10,000, and getting more than 10,000. Is there a point in that business where the owner realizes that you should automate before growing? Because all the cases that I've seen so far, they also get stuck in that route that you've shown where they grow, and then they realize, oh shit, we can't handle this anymore.
Yeah.
And they're stuck now fighting suppliers, basically. It takes a lot longer to automate because they still have to run their business.
Right.
Are there cases where guys actually automated before starting and they were able to grow without having to reinvent?
In a lot of cases, but I think so. There are a lot of cases where people, that guys that have, worked at Bell and TELUS and wherever, and they've seen the processes, and they start their own firm, and then they see, they've learned from that experience that they want to be able to introduce some process right from the start. I think the challenge is a lot of times you get into this hardened process thing where I know I need processes right from the start. I introduce that process. I'm delivering this specific service. Internet connectivity, straightforward service. I'm going to have a nice tight process that makes us really efficient. But then the problem is when they go to change to another service, they have to rebuild that process, right? So that really, because a lot of times, it's fairly obvious a lot of times as you grow, you need automation. You need to make this more efficient. It's taking too long. Records are skewed all over the place. And so we need to kind of put some structure in there when you're doing that. And that's sort of how I took you through that. But then you reach a point where you have a process for internet connectivity, and then, okay, we're going to introduce voice, and then you sort of, okay, we have the internet connectivity here. We introduce the voice service, and we build a process out for that. Now we want to put these two things together, and it becomes difficult. We have to sort of tie them together. Okay, we've done that. But then we introduce a cloud service over here. And okay, I need some internet, I need some, maybe it's a voice cloud. So then you start to get all this spaghetti integration where you're tying all of these processes together. And now I change my vendor that's providing, you know, the connectivity. It's go from Cisco to Alcatel, God forbid. But anyway, you know, it could happen, whatever, or introduce a second vendor into the network, which is a very fair thing to do. And now you disrupt all of those integrations that you've built, right? So now you have to check, geez, will my cloud service work with the Alcatel connectivity? I don't know, are they integrated? I don't know, I got to, you know, there's all kinds of this, you know, verifying that all of those integrations are still valid and working. So the concept here is to keep that connectivity box isolated, no integrations with anything else, and then use some higher level orchestration system to provide that integration. So then you can change this box as much as you want, the connectivity, without affecting the rest. So that's the
All
challenge.
right, sir, I'm afraid I'm going to have to
That's
call
fine.
it there. We're
Yeah.
out of time.
No problem.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, thanks for your attention. Thanks.
Appreciate it.
Thank you very much.
It's a little gift, a token of our appreciation.
Oh, appreciate it, thank you.
We didn't have a lot of money, so